Please welcome my friend, Karla Marquez. All right. So, this is part of our Everybody Always series, Karla, and I'm so glad that you're here. Hug first. Very good. And this is your microphone. Check it out. Make sure it's working. All right. Terrific. All right. So the first thing we want to know, in brief, is your entire life story. So what? Just give us a little thumbnail about yourself and who you are and all that.
Well, it can be summarized in I came, I conquered, and I'm leaving. So I think my life, the way that Pete describes it, really didn't start until 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college. It was during the economic downturn, and everyone was having a hard time finding jobs. None of my friends could find a good job. You know, they'd gotten into debt. They were leaving college with the set of skills that nobody wanted because they didn't have experience. And we were all in the same place. But what made my situation different is that on top of that, I was also undocumented. I didn't have a work permit. I didn't have a driver's license. This is before the driver's license for all kind of movement. I felt trapped. That's the easiest way of putting it. I was living in LA with my family, and one day I was overwhelmed by this, and I started feeling really sick, and I went to the hospital. That was the first time I had a diagnosed panic attack, and the first time that I realized something isn't working here. I need to move on. I need to do something mentally to get myself out of the state. So I bought a ticket, a Greyhound ticket. It seems so magical or romantic to think about it, but I bought a ticket to come up here to visit friends. I went to UC Davis after LA. I visited friends for a while, and my family called, and they said, "Karla, what are you doing? We haven't heard from you in 2 weeks." And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing." And my aunt said, "Can we pick you up?" And I said, "Sure, pick me up. I don't know what I'm going to do." And they picked me up from my friend's house. And I was in Roseville, up north of Sacramento, for about a week. And they said, "We're going to go to a family party in Napa. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go. I mean, what else am I going to do?" I came to this party, and my whole family, my mom's side of the family, was there. They were celebrating my aunt's birthday. And they said, "What are you doing with yourself? What are you doing with your life?" And I said, "I don't know what to do. What can I do? My situation." And I was crying, and I was so upset that they were asking me these difficult questions. And my aunt looked at me, and she just said, "We all have jobs. We all have jobs. Your aunt's a manager at her store. Your aunt has 2 jobs. She's paying for her car and her house. You're telling me that we helped you through college. We supported you through college, and you don't know what you're going to do with your life? It's really sad." And
Nice.
it was kind of it was tough. It was tough to hear that, but I stopped crying. And it made me think. I said, "You're so right. There are so many people who are in this community who are thriving by the standards of what is possible. They're doing so much more with their life. They're working so hard." There have been people at that point, 2009, people who were undocumented had been arrested, had been sent to detention centers, had fought their way out of their system. And here I was sitting in Napa, of all places, feeling sorry for myself that I couldn't find a job. And Napa was doing well at that time, too. Hospitality was great. People were still coming, at least the people who had a lot of money. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll stay here for a couple of days and see if I can find a job." And talking about, God's hand and really setting things up. And it was, I had to make that decision to be here. But he made it possible that I could be connected to the right people. And within a week, I found a job. It turns out that when you're a college-educated person looking for a job, no one really questions why you don't have an ID with you. But they're like, "Well, you just got out of college. Obviously, you don't have an ID or a driver's license." And I was like, "Yeah, that must be it." And I managed to find a job in hospitality, which I held on to really tightly for 5 years. Because I was afraid that if I lost this job, there was no other option. I still have the ticket. I keep the ticket from my return bus back to LA as a reminder that this was a choice I made, and every choice after that has to come with the idea of there's a reason I didn't go back. There's a reason I left behind my mom, my dad, my grandma, my brother and sister. I came up here with my aunts and uncles with no friends, and my job was to figure out what I was going to do. So in summary, that was the first fear I conquered, which was to leave my home and to leave the comfort of my family, to leave my favorite sports teams.
That's pretty easy. That's pretty easy.
Yeah. I will always throw that in there too.
You're talking the Angels, right? Is that what you mean?
Oh, I was thinking about the Galaxy, soccer.
I don't care then.
Yeah, thanks. And the Clippers, which is a whole other sad, tragic story.
Yeah.
But everything has been about conquering the next fear, the next issue that comes in front of me. And then election night happened, and I was upset, but I wasn't quite crushed. And the only reason I can say that is because I had a sense inside of me that this was going to happen, and I don't know how to explain it other than since I was really young, since I was about 4, I've struggled with anxiety, and in my mind the worst thing that can happen is a possibility, so I try to prepare for it. And after decades of therapy and speaking to different people, I've learned how to deal with that, and one of those things was, if this person wins, what is going to be my next step? And when they did win, I knew my next step was to kind of armor up with people, with community, with support. And I can honestly say that it was lonely up to that point, or it felt like I was always struggling. But after that, people realized, like, oh, that's right. You've been telling your story for the last 4 years. You've been open about it. You've talked to law enforcement. What's going to happen if all of a sudden law enforcement has to support immigration enforcement? What is going to happen if all of a sudden everyone who has deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, is targeted by ICE and they come to your house? And since then, the level of support has increased. My sense of centeredness with who I am, as well as where my community is, has improved. And I think it was that sense of community, feeling like I belonged. Even if I was a foreigner, even if I was a stranger for several years, conquering that was the most difficult. And it took 10 years. Like, I can honestly say now that I feel comfortable where I am. But now I'm leaving for law school. So we'll see. A lot of people say, oh, it's so difficult. I don't know how you're going to do it. And I say, what's difficult is getting a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning saying ICE came to someone's house. They took the father. The family can't figure out where he went. It's been 2 hours. And, this happened last year on a Sunday also. And in realizing that you weren't equipped to figure that out. What's difficult was last night at 11:49, we realized that the hotline that we used to report ICE activity wasn't coming to our phones. It wasn't connecting to our hotline wasn't connecting to our personal phones, which meant that today, if there was a raid, we might not get that call until 5 minutes later when we refresh that button. And we're scrambling and calling each other, and we figured it out, and it started working again. But that was difficult. Knowing that there's going to be an exam 3 weeks down the line and what's going to be in it, I mean, by comparison, it's just not the same. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's in brief, my story and where I'm heading.
Tell us a little about the organization that you work with, and what, I know you're transitioning out of that, but what was your role within the organization?
So the organization I work for is Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, which is known as IIBA. They're an immigration legal services nonprofit that provides services that are free or low cost to immigrant communities. It does a variety of things. It provides legal consultations for people to see if they're eligible for something, provides support for renewals of documents like green cards, to apply for naturalization or to become citizens. and also fulfills family petitions. As of January of this past year, we hired a immigration attorney that does deportation or removal also. So she assists people coming in who are saying, I'm in this process, I don't know what to do, I have to go to court. My role in that actually started off as a caseworker, just filling out forms, but now after 4 years of being there, I get to represent my own clients, because nonprofits, in immigration nonprofits, actually have an opportunity to hire people to train them on how to be caseworkers and representatives through a program through the Department of Justice. So that was a different thing. It was, applying for that, I was so nervous. They do a background check. They asked me questions about my status, and at that time, I still do have a work permit through DACA, and if it wasn't for that work permit, I wouldn't be doing this work. So that's my work there. And then I'm also a volunteer through the North Bay Rapid Response Network, which is a hotline that provides services and that provides resources for immigrant communities about their rights. And we also send out legal observers when someone says that they believe that immigration is in a community. And the legal observers are just there to observe, to make sure that violations are not made on the person's rights, or that they're not hurt, their family members aren't hurt.
Great. So help us get inside the mind, the perspective of an undocumented immigrant who's here in our community, maybe has raised their family in the community. Help us understand what's going through their mind now versus 10 years ago, 12 years ago, because I know things have shifted in terms of policy and all that. If you can help us understand, because there are lots of headlines out there about, well, this is who we're talking about, and unfortunately, because it's so politicized, that I think does a disservice to our understanding, because we get locked into a particular way. So kind of within your response, if you can, help from your perspective and the stories you've heard and your own life story. How do the people get here? Why didn't they just go through the process of legal entry into the country? And what are they afraid of now? And it's kind of unpack. Paint us the picture. Help us understand what their experience is.
So I think really the difference and what has shifted, the biggest shift, really starts back in 96. 96 was a year that was really difficult for a lot of advocates. It was under, not to bring in politics, but it has to do with the politics. It had to do with the fact that the Congress was basically ruled by one party, and in 96 we had a Democratic president. And the idea was, after they had amnesty in the 80s, people are still coming to this country. What is going on? Why are they still coming? Well, let's set out punishments, really severe punishments for people, so that they cannot just come into the country. It'll deter them from coming to the country. And up to that point, really, people were able to come into the country as tourists, or sometimes even as temporary workers, go back to their country. It was very transactional. The idea of coming to this country and working was something that was normal, especially in California. But what happened in 96 is that they said, if you come to this country and you stay in the country for 6 months or more without permission, you have a 3-year bar from re-entering. If you come into the country and you're in the country for a year or more, you have 10-year bar to re-entry. And even if you have a family member, you get married and you have children, they will not be able to petition for you until you leave the country for those 10 years. What that created is, and also if you enter more than once without permission, or you overstay your time, you will have that bar, and you will also not have that bar forgiven. So what you have is, after 96, people who had family members who want to petition for them, all of a sudden they can't. And on top of that, not only can they not petition for them, but now they're afraid of returning to their home country for any reason, even to visit family members who are dying, because if they leave, they're leaving behind a child, they're leaving behind all their grandmother, their cousins who might have come here a couple months earlier and got amnesty. And now we have people who are, rather than being a transaction, they're stuck. They're stuck in the country. And they could go back, but that means not seeing their family ever again. So thinking about that and those punishments, what started happening in around 2009 was that there were these things called ICE holds, which meant that local law enforcement would get a notice from ICE saying, you need to detain this person in your jail because immigration is looking for them, they're dangerous, they're criminals, and all of law enforcement was fulfilling that. Our local law enforcement was doing them. They were holding people, and they said, well, we're doing it because we got a notice that this person's dangerous. Well, it turns out that immigration was just kind of scanning through records and seeing, okay, was this person who was detained, they didn't look for previous background. They just said, does this person have a social security? Or did they say that they're a citizen? If not, then just detain them, and then we'll pick them up and we'll take care of them. Well, a lot of people were being, at that time, if you didn't have a driver's license, you could technically be detained by the police. You could actually be arrested for not having the proper form of ID. So you had people who were being arrested by police for not having their ID. Now imagine going to the store, you forget your ID. The fear that causes to not have that ID is extreme right now. You think, I'm going to get a ticket. Well, for a lot of people, the fear it causes, I could get deported if I don't have that ID. But people still needed to work. And then as years went on and we started seeing these trends of every single person who's undocumented is being held, whether they were pulled over because they didn't have their ID or because they were picked up as part of, there was a domestic violence call, but we don't know who the person who instigated this was or what really happened. They usually would detain people regardless of whose fault it was. Sometimes people would still be held there and then be deported or picked up by ICE. Local law enforcement said, hey, it's not possible that we went from having a couple people picked up by ICE and deported to all of a sudden having hundreds of people who apparently are serious criminals, and ICE is telling us that they've all been living here for this long. What's going on? Also, there are issues with reporting to law enforcement that people weren't calling law enforcement because they were concerned that someone in their family could be picked up. So if they're victims of crime, they're afraid of calling because they could be picked up even though they weren't the ones who instigated the domestic violence abuse, but their partner could blame them for it. So it got pretty bad. And in 2012, finally local law enforcement said, we're not going to hold people anymore. If we're going to hold people, we need to see some kind of proof that the individual we're holding is actually someone who has either a removal order or a deportation order, or that they've committed several serious crimes here in Napa County, so we're going to hold them. And all of a sudden, that number went from hundreds of people back to like maybe 5 a year. So, the last 3 years have been difficult because we thought we were in a place where we said, okay, well, our community is better. People are reporting crimes. I've talked to several people who come into my office and say, yeah, I reported a crime, or there was something going on that was suspicious with minors next door, and I called the police, and they questioned me, but they never asked me about my immigration status, so I felt like I could report. But now people are saying, but if I call, will they ask me about my status? And that's where, even though the California law protects people from having their immigration status questioned when they report a crime, they're still afraid because of what they're seeing in the media.
Yep.
So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and we saw that right here on our campus with the fires when we were an evacuation center, particularly Latino families that would come. They wanted initially to be in our sanctuary where we had cots set up, not our gym where more cots were set up. And the reason they wanted to be in there is because it's a sanctuary. And they felt safer for the same reason, as they were just worried that somehow, some way, ICE would come in to the evacuation center and take them out. So I'm going to play devil's advocate with you a little bit, but first to just put my cards on the table, so you kind of know where I'm at on these issues and all that, because sometimes I know this never happens to anybody else in our country, but sometimes people assume things about me. This is the way he must think about this, and oftentimes I hear that feedback, and I'm like, we never had a conversation about this. They have no idea what they're talking about. So I really appreciate you giving historical context going back to 96, because this whole issue didn't just happen overnight. My hunch is that you here today, you probably have strong feelings about this issue, one way or another. And I wonder if, because we are kind of stuck in the news cycle now, if we pause long enough to realize we didn't just get here, but that this issue has been complex from day one, and it has been growing in its complexity, and in some ways we've made it more complicated over time. One of the things that just ticked me off years ago, I was at a roundtable discussion with a guy named Leith Anderson, who was a big deal pastor in America. In fact, at that time, he was president of the National Evangelical Association, and he had audience with the president. And the thing that he shared with me, which was so disturbing and disgusting, and I've shared this before, but at that time, he was telling a story that under George W. Bush, there was a DREAM Act that was crafted from a bipartisan committee, and they came up with what they felt was a good thing. But they took it to Congress, which was deeply divided along political lines, and because it was coming from George W. Bush, the Democratic side killed it. And the thing never saw the light of the day, even though it was bipartisan. And they were like, this could really solve the problem. So it didn't go anywhere. And then Obama gets elected and basically brings back the same exact team. They nuance it just a touch. And so the president puts it forward to Congress. But because he's a Democrat now and the Congress is Republican-controlled, they shot it down. And so we're 16 years later after all that started to happen, and we're no better off, and it just continues to mount and is more and more challenging. So my perspective on it is we've made a mess. We have made the crisis here. And it's because of our own negligence and poor ability to get along and work across the aisle and all that has brought us to now. The other thing, just to put my cards on the table before I give you a real zinger, so get ready. I was reading an article just yesterday from a kind of a down-the-middle news source. And it was just talking about how many people have been deported under different presidents. And every president, it went back to the Clinton era, and Clinton, Bush, Obama, and obviously Trump, the three previous, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, deported lots of people, millions of people. So this is not a new phenomenon. And depending on which numbers you look at, there were like two numbers. If you bring both those numbers together, then George W. Bush did more. Also, interestingly, up till 9/11, there were like over 1 million, like 1.2 million coming into our country. 9/11 happens. We tighten things up significantly. That number dropped to a quarter of that. So historically, what we're talking about in terms of this mad rush into the border is nothing compared to what it was pre-9/11, which is fascinating to me. And yet, we're freaking out now on this issue that I think that we have largely caused. So anyway, I thought it was interesting that all the presidents have deported lots of people. What this article said shifted in recent years is the prioritization of who gets deported. And I think this goes to why there's fear now more than there was before. It used to be that the presidents, their primary agenda was find the ones that have a criminal background and target them. And then also, as soon as people cross the border that are undocumented, as soon as possible, deport them back or return them because they haven't got roots yet. And they kind of laid off the ones who were here and working and being a part of the community and all that. That was the MO. But under this administration, it's shifted so that now the threat is very real for coming right here into Napa. And I shared a story with you before, about some corruption in some of American corporations that entice people to come in and say, we have jobs for you if you make it through, and then we'll have them together, and then when it comes time for payroll in certain circumstances, they call ICE to have their own employees taken away so they can get new immigrants to come in and work for them to do the same thing over again. I mean, it's crazy stuff that's going on. So here's my question for you, plain devil's advocate. So I wanted to give you my context, so when I ask this question, you don't think, gosh, I had no idea Pete was such a jerk. But I kind of am a jerk. Just ask my wife. But that's beside the point. So here's a question I have for you. This whole thing would be solved, Karla, if people would just come in legally and get documentation before they come in rather than breaking into our country, sneaking in and trying to take advantage of all of our resources, driving up the cost of health care, stealing our jobs, all these thugs and marauders and all that. So why don't they just come in the legal way?
So let's start with they come in and take all the resources. Let's break it down from the most recent to the past. They can't get the resources. They're not eligible for free health care. They're not eligible for financial assistance. They pay taxes, and a lot of them are afraid of getting a tax return because either one, they might be using a number that was fabricated, so they don't get their taxes back. Or even if they do have a valid Social Security, they might not be reporting everyone who's in their household, so they're not going to get their taxes back. So this idea that that individuals, that I am contributing to a system that I'm withdrawing more from, it's not true. We're contributing out of a necessity to be here to work, and the expectation that will come back to us, it's not there. Now, to get here, it's really difficult. If you show up at a Mexican embassy and say, I need to go visit my sick mother, I need to go visit my family, take care of my family member, and you have a stain on your shirt, well, geez, you must be poor. And we know that poor people are going to come into this country and they are just going to stay here because they're going to find jobs, so we're not going to let you in. So somebody comes in and says to visit their family member, and their family says, we need you to stay here. It's a hard call. When your family asks you for support, when your family needs you to take care of grandma, when your children are afraid of going to school because they've been 5 shootings outside of the school in the last month, it's difficult to say no to safety and to family. So that, and also if you're a young male in Mexico and you say, I've heard that there's these jobs over there, my cousin's telling me that there's these jobs, and you show up at the embassy and you say, I want to work in the United States because there's a lot of jobs, there's no way of doing that. You can't just come here to get that job. You can't just come in to work at the Tyson chicken factory, whatever it might be, or to pick whatever vegetables that are growing in California. The company has to petition for people to come in, but in order to petition for them, people are paying a lot of money to be put into a queue to get that visa. So the jobs are here. The jobs are here. The families have been here and coming back and forth between the United States and Mexico for decades, for centuries. And we've created a wall, literally a wall, to stop people from doing what has naturally happened for a very long time. So it's, I don't think anybody who has worked on the solutions to immigration thinks that if they just closed off the borders, that everything would be fine. And they also don't believe that if you made an application available for everybody, that it would necessarily be just for all of the countries. There are quotas based on the country where people are from. If you're from Mexico or from El Salvador, those quotas are really low compared to what other countries can get, considering that our families have been coming to this country for a long time. So there is no system for people to reunite with their family members that is fair, or that allows them to actually reunite. Mm-hmm. If my sister petitioned for me today, I wouldn't be eligible to come to the U.S. for another 80 years. So what system is that? It's not a system. It's a long list, a to-do list that we keep putting off.
But that's not my problem, Karla. Your mom made the decision to bring you in when you were a young girl, and it's not, as a citizen, taxpayer, I don't care, because you're here under false pretenses anyway, so I don't care if you get kicked out or never come back, because you're not supposed to be here in the first place. So for people who express that kind of attitude or have that kind of feeling, and I'm hoping to give voice to some of the questions that nobody would ask out loud, how would you respond to that kind of an approach that's, says it's not our problem because you came illegally, and so, I don't care if you didn't make the choice, you didn't, but why is it my problem?
So I will say that being in the community and contributing back and me paying taxes is actually a choice. I have that choice myself, but a lot of people don't have that choice. A lot of people are seeing that opportunity is here, not because they made that opportunity, but because that opportunity has been there. The farms aren't running themselves. We're not out there picking the grapes so that we can make wine. We're not out there cleaning the hotel rooms after the tourists leave. And I would even say that the fact that we're not acknowledging the contributions that people who are here undocumented are providing to our communities and to our country makes it worse to also fight for the rights of the people who are part of the unions or who are trying to get better pay. If you put down one group and then you say, well, they don't deserve that right, we have to start from somewhere. We have to start protecting the rights of all individuals. So I'm not here to say that my rights are greater or that I need more protection. What I'm saying is that you stand with me and I'll stand with you. You need the help. You want a better healthcare system. You need more people as nurses. It's not coming only from one place. It's coming from different countries as well. And I would say that we need to find a system that allows the improvement of our country while not also stigmatizing the color of the skin or the country that a person's coming from.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know in very recent years, the process for even, like the numbers of people that are allowed to even have a hearing for asylum or refugee and all that has changed significantly. How does that change the game for people who are trying to get in an illegal route? What have you seen?
So I had the fortune of actually going down to the border, which I didn't tell my family before I was going or when I made the decision because I was afraid that they would say, don't go, what are you thinking? But I said, maybe I'll just tell them before I leave that I'm actually going into a detention center in the border. We walked in, and what we found was a system of legal orientation, which, college students, when they go to orientation to start school, they get a full day of orientation where everything's explained to them, and then they get a counselor, and they're told step by step what they need to do to get out of college, to succeed. They get mentors. The immigration system is one where you walk into a room to get a legal orientation for about an hour, you talk to someone for about 20 minutes, and then go out and win your case. And we're talking about a legal structure that if you make a mistake and you represent yourself, that's it. There's no backup. There's no, well, I didn't understand that question. I didn't understand why you were asking me. Am I afraid of going back to my country? And actually, that's not the way they even phrase it. They don't ask, why are you afraid of going back to the country? They'll be asked, what is your particular social group? And, I've seen the smartest attorneys fail at being able to describe what a particular social group is. So you have someone who says, I don't belong to a group, when they might belong to a group which an attorney or someone might say, yes, they belong to a group, a class of women or transgender people who live in this country and are being persecuted. But you ask someone, what group do you belong to? And they don't want to get in trouble. They don't say, oh, I belong to this church, or I belong to this ethnic group. Or they don't see themselves because of the way that they're alienated in their own country, that being transgender is actually a group. and they don't give the right answers, and then they end up being sent back to their country, from where they will leave again because they're not safe. And this just happens over and over again. It's an ongoing cycle of people not having a place to live or to feel safe. The process has been made more difficult by the fact that they have to pass an interview before they even get a hearing. Some people are too afraid to speak at the interview. They don't know how to explain where their fear came from, or they just don't know how to talk about their own trauma with a stranger. And they've never been to therapy or talked to anybody else about it. So they end up maybe not passing the interview, and even if they pass the interview, they have to know how to answer what is your particular social group. And even after that, they might stay in detention for as long as the judge wants them to stay, or as long as it takes to even see a judge, because there aren't that many judges. So the system, in a way, I can't help but think about one of my clients right now, that they came in about a month before they decided to stop allowing asylum seekers to come into the country. She would have stayed in Mexico had she come in a month later. And talking about hardship, I mean, this person fled their country because they're transgender. They had 2 cousins who were gay, who were killed. They left the country. They went through Mexico, sustained abuse in Mexico. And what would happen if they were living at the border? What would happen if they were sleeping on the streets again? And we know that that's not a safe place to be, because people who have bad intentions will go there and look for a way of hurting other people, whether it's from this country, from another country. People are attracted to causing misery sometimes. So I think about that, and I think about the system, and it's just difficult to explain to people how hard it is to come into this country to seek asylum, or to go into any country really to seek asylum.
Yeah. So final question. We're in the series Everybody Always, and the undocumented immigrants are, especially here in Napa Valley, a very significant, important part of our everybody. So what would your advice be to us, regular, everyday folks here in Napa, in relationship to being supportive, or what would your advice be for how to interface best, or what to do with part of our everybody who has always been here? Mm-hmm. What would you say?
Mm-hmm. There's so many good ways of participating with the community. I mean, if you just go to one of the Mexican markets, or you go to a Mexican restaurant that's owned by a family, you see there what the culture is like. You see a culture of family, a culture of support. You see the variety in how people interact with their families. It's very different. So I would say the first thing is just look at the community that is there. Just see how people are interacting. Maybe not stare too long, because they might get scared. I get scared if someone stares at me too long, but
right.
But just witnessing that interaction. I think when you witness that with our elected official, when you witness that, I felt, even though I was like, oh, I got scared. I was like, Pete, stop talking. What are we gonna do? Like, oh my goodness. Like, I could see in your face, there was something that just, I could see that your defenses were there because of the way you looked at this person. You looked at your notebook, and I saw someone who was finally witnessing what I was going through, mm-hmm. and having that feeling of like my experience was transferred over to someone else was extremely powerful. So, I mean, I don't want everyone to go through that experience, because it was pretty significant, and I actually went home and I was just like, oh, poor Pete. And I'm like, wait, this person was talking to me too, but I thought, poor Pete, he's never experienced this before. Mm-hmm. It's having that sense of empathy for each other, and really forgiving ourselves also for not knowing about another group or another community. Not feeling ashamed for the fact that you might never experience something like that, but still feeling feeling that in your heart that even if you can't or you won't have that full experience, knowing that someone else is going through that and asking what is it that they need. One of the things that we're doing today is there's a group of people who asked, what can we do to show support for the community? We're going to have a poster making session at Veterans Park at 12 o'clock, around 12 to 2, where we're just going to have supplies. We're asking the community to come in and write your own message to the immigrant community, to your neighbor. It doesn't have, preferably it would be a positive one because people are afraid. And even if you don't like the current administration or the head of ICE or whatever that might be, that still doesn't make people feel safe, like they're welcomed. So in standing with your neighbor and supporting your neighbor and loving your neighbor, it's about showing that love for the neighbor and not necessarily showing the hate for the other person. So I would definitely say if you can, create a message, write a message, share in whatever way you can with your own neighbors and with your neighbors at the stores to let them know that you're supportive of them.
That's very good. As I spoke about last week, Jesus spoke into political situations, but he wasn't about politics. And you might have strong feelings about this, and I might even get some feedback with you, like, why'd you go political today? And I'm not going political today because our calling is higher than politics. We're not stooping so low as to get our hands bloody in politics because our politicians created the mess that we have right now. But we have a clear statement from the Scriptures and the entire breadth of the Scriptures about what it means to treat people with dignity and respect. And that is absolutely clear. And so I think for us, and I hope we've achieved something here today, that you've recognized that, one, this issue is more complex than the talking points on the campaign trail. And these are real people that have impacted your lives, even if you don't realize it. And that there are things that we can do to be Jesus. That's our tagline, go be Jesus. There are things that we can do to truly go be Jesus, to be that voice of humanity and love and grace and respect that is above the political garbage that we have to endure. So I hope that's what I'm kind of hearing you say today, and I deeply appreciate it.
And I have to say, speaking of not being political, and this is where it gets funny, is I always, when I share my experience with people about what I've done in the past, my internships, where I've gone, I was in Washington, D.C. in winter of 2008, which was January through March, doing an internship program through UC Davis. And part of what I was doing is social media was rising and people were using it more to share information, to share news. And I said, I want to do a research project on this and work with a campaign so that I can see how they use social media and interview people and just try to learn more about it. And I try to get into all of the campaigns that I thought would be friendly towards me. I didn't get into a single one. They all either said, they all said nothing. They didn't respond to me, and I was so crushed. I was like, well, there goes my research idea. And then I thought, well, why am I limiting myself to one political party? So then I looked over, and I saw the candidates that were running for president from the Republican Party, and I said, well, which one do I kind of like? Like, which one kind of resonates with me? And at that time, campaign finance was, or part of the DREAM Act was really pushed by McCain, and I thought, well, let's see what his campaign is doing. And this was when he was on his bus traveling or using JetBlue because he didn't have money. Like, no one was supporting him. And I thought, well, he's going to need help. So I called the campaign. They took me on. I mean, I went in there, and after 2 days of making phone calls to Florida, which was something interesting, they were like, you're great on the phones. You want to answer the phones for the campaign? And this was at headquarters. So I had a really valuable experience there, being exposed to a different group of people. And talking about being foreign, I was the most foreign there by far. But the experience was so positive and loving, and the people who I worked with were so great, even when we were talking about issues of immigration. That I thought to myself, I wish everyone had this experience of walking into somewhere new, thinking there's no way I'm going to like this, but then walking out with a good experience and understanding of each other. So don't think that I'm a one-party person. I'm definitely a people person, and I hope that everyone gets that experience as well.
That's awesome. Well said. Well said. Yeah, awesome. Well, our time is coming to a close, and I'd like to just pray over you if I can, if that's cool with you. All right, can I touch your shoulder?
Yeah.
That's my official anointing pose. All right. Would you join me in prayer? So, God, I am so grateful for my friend Karla and the ways that she has truly spoken into my life and given me eyes to see things that I wouldn't have seen, and a presence about her that is inspiring to me. And so I thank you for her, and I thank you what you have done through her in her life, and what you're going to do through her life as she goes and completes her law degree, and who knows where that'll take her. But I thank you for her heart. I thank you for her compassion and her ability to be vulnerable with us. And I just pray that you bless her and her new husband as they journey through life in this next great chapter. Thank you for her life. Thank you for her friendship. And God, just love on her more and more, that she would know how deeply she is loved. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.